All right. Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you all for being here for our day 2 of this great language and literacy conference. I am so happy and excited to talk to you today about some amazing resources that some of you are probably becoming familiar with at this point. And they come from the TSTM, or the Teaching Skills That Matter Toolkit. And today we're going to be looking at 2 sections of that toolkit and some lessons that are related to health literacy and financial literacy. And we will look at some lessons and some materials that you can use to help build competency in both of these really important areas. My name is Stephanie Sommers. I am the ACES coordinator through Atlas. And I have also really been very lucky to be a coach with the TSTM project. The project is now in its 3rd year. And so we are on our 4th cohort of teachers. So in year 1, there was 1 cohort. Then in year 2, they did 2 cohorts for different regions of the country. And this year they're doing a 4th and probably final cohort. It has been a nationwide initiative, and I will talk more about that in just a minute. I also work for Minneapolis Public Schools, where I am the adult diploma coordinator and the writing curriculum team lead. All right, so we just have a few objectives today. We're lucky to have a lot of time to talk about these things, but we just have a couple of objectives. So I'm hoping that by the end of our time this morning, you'll be able to explain what is included in the terms health literacy and financial literacy. So what do those words even mean? Why are they important? We're also going to spend some time talking about 3 instructional approaches that are highly effective, especially when working with adult learners. And then finally, we'll share quite a number of resources that you'll be able to use in your classroom. All right. And I wanted to kind of explain how this will be, how our time today will be divided up. So we are doing a 2-hour session. We will take a short break roughly in the middle of the session. During the first part, we'll be talking about health literacy. And I want people to know that the resources that I'll share during the first part of today's session are the same resources that were shared in November during the statewide fall conference. And so because the resources from part 1 were already shared, I'm going to spend more time in part 1 really looking at the lessons so that people become a little bit familiar with where you can find them, how they are organized and laid out. So we'll spend time in some breakout rooms this morning looking at those toolkit lessons so that in the future, hopefully you will have greater familiarity with them and you'll be able to pull them out and use them. We will quickly go through the health literacy resources, but again, you could access the recording from the November session if you wanted to hear about them more in depth. We'll take a short break, and then during part 2, I'm going to focus a little bit less on the lesson plans. We'll still talk about them, and that's when we'll spend more time talking about the financial literacy lessons, okay? So I hope that makes sense to everyone, and I hope that's okay with you as we get going this morning. All right, so what is TSTM? So TSTM stands for the Teaching the Skills That Matter, okay? And it's a project that was authorized under WIOA. As we know, WIOA is legislation that looks to accelerate access to employment and training programs for adults who are receiving educational services. WIOA likes to highlight basic academic skills, critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, and self-management skills. This project, TSTM, was funded by OCTAE, and then the project is sort of facilitated and planned by AIR, the American Institutes for Research. And so the project team comes from AIR. There were teachers from all over the country who applied and were selected to be coaches. And our very own Patsy Egan from Atlas was one of the subject matter experts on the project. She reviewed the curriculum to make sure that the lesson plans would work for our adult learners, and especially those who were not native English speakers. Betsy Parrish also worked as a subject matter expert, as well as Jen Vanek, some of our friends from Minnesota ABE. And so this project had input from experts all around the country, and then it was vetted with teachers from all over the country. So one of the things about this project I think is really great is the toolkit was developed, and this is how the toolkit is laid out. And I'll say a little bit more about this. But teachers from all over the country actually piloted these lessons and provided feedback. And another piece of the training involved coaching, which was how I was involved. And so feedback was given on the lessons. They've been revamped. And so at this point, they are really field tested, high quality lessons that were developed by subject matter experts, tried out by ABE teachers. And you can rest assured that the lessons are going to be rigorous and of high interest to your students. So, and they're all free. There are over 25 lessons in the toolkit that are all free and available on the Links website. The way that the toolkit is organized, part of the project involves teaching students these 9 central skills. You'll recognize a number of these skills as they overlap with our ACES TIF, right? We've got communication, critical thinking, navigating systems. Some of the other titles, of course, are kind of embedded and included in some of what we have in ACES TIF. And so those are the skills that are referred to when we talk about the skills that matter. And the lessons were designed to provide opportunities for students to really practice these skills. Then the toolkit is divided into 5 topic areas. So we've got civics education, that's the area that Betsy Parrish worked on. Digital literacy, of course, that was Jen Vanek. Financial literacy and health literacy, those were developed by subject matter experts from around the country, different areas of the country, I should say, as well as workforce prep. Okay, then the toolkit also provides example lessons using each of these 3 instructional approaches. We've got project-based learning, problem-based learning, and integrated and contextualized instruction. And we know that these 3 approaches work really well for our adult learners, and they also provide an opportunity for teachers to deliver lessons that are really integrated and really allow students to practice a number of skills all at the same time in one lesson or unit. So there are 5 downloadable lesson plans for each topic area. There's an example for each of the 3 instructional approaches, and we're going to look at those in just a minute. And then there are also videos that were developed to highlight the 3 different instructional approaches in the different topic areas. As we know, there are not a lot of videos that were created for adult education teachers. And so these really are beneficial for our field. And I will say Leah Conklin-Olson did the project-based and problem-based learning examples. And so those videos also will feature a friendly face. So again, here is the link. On the Links website, you don't have to register or sign in to access the lessons. They are located under Federal Initiatives, and you're going to click on Teaching Skills That Matter. So actually, we're not going to do the links during the session because I'm hoping to kind of keep everyone's attention on what we're talking about. There is a PDF version of these slides available in the participant folder, and all of the links are available there, okay? So thanks for that question. Here is just a quick snap or screen grab of what the health literacy section looks like. All of the sections of the toolkit for the content areas start with an issue brief, there's a case study, and then these different lesson plans. So a lot of really great materials, all free and accessible online. Oops, excuse me. Okay, so we're going to start now and thinking about health literacy in particular. So why is health literacy important? So obviously we have all been living through a time when you could not get better real life examples of why health literacy is important, right? We're all navigating year 2, moving maybe even into year 3 of a pandemic. And here is some of the information that you could find out there that circulated during COVID about different cures and remedies. Does sunlight kill the coronavirus? Can eating garlic help prevent infection with the new coronavirus? And we've got one down at the bottom here about, does vitamin D cure COVID-19, right? So we know how important it is for all of our learners to know where to access high quality health information. But also part of health literacy is being able to determine the good information, the reliable information from the less reliable information. These examples come from the World Health Organization website. I'm sure that we could all name a lot of other examples of some less than accurate health information that we've seen circulating over the past couple of years. So we know why it's important for our students to have these skills, and a definition of health literacy, we can look right here. And this comes from the toolkit. This comes from the issue brief, okay? Health literacy skills means having the knowledge, skills and ability to ask relevant questions, to obtain and apply information for credibility and quality, communicate effectively, and make critical decisions to promote one's health and well-being and that of one's family and community. So that's how we're defining health literacy, okay? And then here we're going to talk just for a second about how we might use these toolkit lessons. So the lessons are incredibly useful and they provide really great jumping off points for seeing how to integrate these skills and use the approaches. If there's one drawback to the toolkit, it's that the lessons are individual lessons. They don't exist within sort of a unit. There's not like a scope and sequence for using them. And so trying one of the lessons would be a great way if you were already, I know a lot of especially ESL teachers do a health unit. And so bringing in one of these lessons would be a great way to bring some health literacy into your classroom. If you are an HSE teacher, I think one of the things about these lessons is they could be integrated into like a science lesson. They could be integrated into doing some great nonfiction reading or informational texts with your learners. And we're going to see how they can be adapted and modified because they are open source resources. So we're going to take a quick look at each of the types of lessons. So problem-based, project-based, and integrated and contextualized. And then we are going to spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms so that you can look more closely at these lessons. And yes, they aren't situated in a larger scope. The way I've kind of come to think about the lessons is I think you could look at these lessons and get an idea for what you might want to talk about in sort of a series of lessons. And the toolkit lesson often contains sort of a culminating activity. And so I tend to think of the toolkit lesson as being the one I might put at the end of my unit. And I would plan backwards from that to add more context to be able to use it sort of at the end as a culminating project or culminating activity. So that's one way I think you could use them successfully. And they also are just great examples of solid lessons that you could pull out and use, and even use as, sort of models for your own planning. All right, so here is the first lesson. It is the problem-based learning lesson. This lesson has to do with barriers to successful patient-doctor communication. So in this lesson, we have the Diaz family, and they are having some challenges communicating and navigating the US healthcare system. And so a lot of the problem-based lessons in the toolkit make use of scenarios or scenario-based learning, where students are given a short scenario to read, and then they have questions to kind of guide their discussion. And through reading about and thinking about the problem, they also leads into talking about solutions, brainstorming various solutions, evaluating those solutions to determine what the best course of action would be for the family here. That in this situation for the Diaz family, otherwise just how to resolve the problem that's described in the scenario. Okay, the project-based learning lesson here talks about planning a trip to a hospital or healthcare facility. I will say these lessons, excuse me, these lessons were developed pre-COVID. I'm sure no one's going out right now to visit a healthcare facility as a field trip. However, the lesson does also talk a little bit about how you could do some virtual visits, or maybe invite a guest speaker into your classroom using something like Zoom. I think the lesson could be adapted rather than a field trip, maybe more like preparing for informational interviews. And so the project here involves having students kind of gather information and then present what they've learned. Okay, and one of the important components of project-based learning that comes through in the lessons is that the students are involved in designing or choosing the project if there are different options listed, or sometimes the students actually decide what they'd like their final project to look like, and they lay out the expectations and criteria for the project. Okay, and then the final lesson here for the 3 approaches is this one, the cost of smoking, which is an integrated and contextualized learning lesson. And I hope this is obvious, but I guess maybe it's not. I am showing you the first page of the lessons and then 1 page from the plan. So they are not, this is not the whole thing. There are other pages in between here that contain a lesson sequence, like a warm up, a modeling, an extension activity. And you'll get to see those in just a moment. So in this lesson, students are practicing some math skills where they are thinking about how much money could be saved by quitting smoking. And so here is the appendix for this particular lesson, and it's focusing on multiplication practice with some word problems. You could, if your students, if multiplication is not where it's at for them, there are ways you could adjust this and have them focusing maybe on a different type of math skill. The gist of integrated and contextualized lessons is that you are teaching basic skills such as reading, writing, and math within a meaningful context. So again, in this lesson, students are going to read and speak And they're going to practice effective communication and critical thinking. And then they're also going to be doing some of this math practice, but the context is figuring out how much one could save by cutting down or quitting smoking. And I guess the other side of that is you're really putting a price on how much you're spending when you have a smoking habit. Okay. So those are the 3 lessons quickly and in a nutshell. And I know that you're going to want to spend a little more time looking at them. So right now we're going to go into some breakout rooms. So you are going to be assigned a breakout room. And when you get into your room, you will have access in the chat to the 3 lesson plans that we just quickly ran through. So the project-based, the problem-based, and the integrated and contextualized. I would very much like you to choose one lesson plan that you're going to look at as a group, okay? Because I want everyone kind of talking about the same lesson plan. It doesn't really matter if your group doesn't all, agree right away. Don't spend a lot of time deciding because we don't have a lot of times to spend in these groups. Just pick one. You'll have access to all of the plans. You can look at them more closely later. So once the first task is to choose which plan you're going to look at. Then you will spend about 5 minutes skimming that plan. Again, everyone's going to be looking at the same plan. And then I'd like you to spend the rest of your time in your group talking about these questions here. Okay, so thank you, Christine. Just put the lesson plans and the questions in the chat. Okay, so you're going to think about and talk about what adaptations would you want or need to make in order to use this lesson with your learners. What supports or scaffolds would you add? What other activities, lessons, or materials have you used that are related to health literacy? Again, our time will be short. We're only going to have 15 minutes total. So about 5 minutes to become familiar with the plan and about 10 minutes to discuss the questions. So, maybe you can each focus on one question you'd like to talk about with your group. Then we'll come back and we'll spend a few minutes sharing out as a large group. Okay. If this is not clear, please chat to me using the chat box. I think Christine has shared everything we need. So I think we're ready to go to our breakout rooms.
Okay, I'm just moving just to make these all even here. Okay, I think I've got everything ready to go. So we're ready to go. Have fun in your breakout rooms. This is great to have the time to talk.
Hi, if I've been, oh, there it is. Thank you. I was looking for the prompt.
And one more. And let's see, room 2. Okay. As some extra people jumped in, so I had to assign them. Let us know if you're having any trouble getting into your breakout rooms. Got some people here: Barbara, Beatrice, Harmony, Vicky. Kim. Let's see. Kim, I did just assign you to a room so you can join. Great. Okay. Stephanie, would you like, do we need to talk about anything? Would you like me to put us in a breakout room?
Sure.
Okay. Let me find 1-6. Okay, Arlene, I just put you in a room.
Christine,
Yes.
you want to pause the recording?
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed your time in breakout rooms. I know that people have different feelings about breakout rooms, or not everybody's favorite, but hopefully the time was valuable and you could at least get a better feel for what those lessons looked like. So I would love to have a couple people who might be willing to, share out something that you talked about in your breakout room, or, which lesson you looked at, and maybe just sort of a initial impression of that lesson, or if you've started thinking about how you might use it in class. And again, we are a pretty big group, so I think the breakout room, or I'm sorry, excuse me, I think the chat box might still be the best option for doing that. So I would really love to get a few, get a conversation started in the chat. As I said in my session yesterday about writing, all of us have had experience now teaching in a virtual classroom, and all of us, or maybe almost all of us, know what it feels like to be in that virtual classroom, and you feel like you're talking to yourself because your students are, kind of sitting back in the background. So please be a person who is willing to participate a little bit and maybe share an idea in the chat, because that really adds richness to a session. So, okay, thanks, Barbara. Okay, and Mary says in room 9, we had math, science, and technology educators and looked at integrated and contextualized. Great. And I hope that looking at that lesson through those different lenses was interesting. That lesson does contain, I think there's a lot of different directions you could go in for talking about those different content areas. So great, Mary. And Heather says, create a routine around the topic of navigating health system and problems with multiple stories for the problem based. Yes, I think there are different, I'm sure, published stories that I know some of the reading skills for today's adults texts, for example, deal with health related topics. So you could certainly, once you kind of introduce students to the idea of reading a story or reading a text and discussing the problems and then thinking about solutions, that could become a great routine. Thanks, Heather. And Rachel says, We just finished writing problem solution paragraphs about goals or career. So we could try writing paragraphs again with the medical problem solution as the topic. Yes, so I love that idea of sort of coming back to a skill that you've already practiced with your students. So in this case, it would be writing that problem solution paragraph. And now that they know how to produce that type of writing, what great practice and reinforcement it would be to practice it within a different context this time. And instead of the career goals, talking about medical stuff. That's a great idea, Rachel. Thank you so much. And Maura says, it was mentioned in our group to teach whole part relationship when prepping for pie graphs. Yeah, graphic literacy, such an important part of preparing our students for success. And that's a really great idea. Thank you, Maura. And Danielle says, oh, now we've got lots of ideas going on. Ideas from group on the smoking lesson, add a reading passage. Explore real cost of smoking if you get cancer or pay for your own health insurance. Yes, especially probably sort of those penalty rates that you might have to pay if you were a smoker, and how that affects your insurance. Math, add estimation versus multiplication. What a great idea, Danielle, from a insightful math teacher. Google cost of cigarettes locally and add percent cost of taxes. Yeah, I think here in Minnesota in particular, you could probably bring in some information about the tobacco lawsuit and talk about that, and a lot of interesting local context for that as well. And Rachel says, doing this activity more than once and swapping the stories, either new reading or students' personal stories, great. Our group thought that there could be a lot you could do with the self-awareness aspect of the contextualized lesson on smoking. We also love the graph for reading data and how you could use that to analyze source, validity of data, etc. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, bringing in one of those essential or skills that matter, the self-awareness. Really, really great to think about. Alicia says, I taught one recently on diabetes from reading skills for today's adults. Great. It will be fun to consider how we can revisit the lesson in a different context, right? So I think you could kind of tweak it and maybe bring in some math or charts or graphing, maybe related to like the cost of insulin and how having a condition like diabetes might financially affect you. Sarah says, we looked at the smoking lesson. A couple of us in our room were beginning ESL and thought we could adapt. Oh, great. Great. Sarah, thank you so much for bringing up how when you look at that lesson, you started thinking about how you could adapt it for your students, because we know as ABE teachers that adaptive expertise is so important. Thanks for bringing that up. Karen says, the cost of smoking, we could add a final assessment for kinesthetic learners by having them create a personal graphic about the financial health and social cost of smoking and how they and their families are affected. Oh, I love the idea, of doing a PSA, a public service announcement. What a great idea to get students speaking and maybe collaborating in a group and that's in thinking about audience and tone and so much richness in that idea. Someone says, Patricia says, we could use a calculator. Mary Quick says our group also discussed, you could talk about the nutrition of Lunchables. Yes, my kids love those. And oh goodness, yeah, we know they're not probably the healthiest lunch, or looking at the nutrition of a school lunch, maybe, talking about the cost of Starbucks coffee. Lots of great ideas here. Ooh, Heather says, practice using dictionary skills. That's a great CCRS tie in there around the medical terminology. Do a compare and contrast, Laura brings up, between cigarette smoking and vaping. That's a really, really great idea. And we've got some support for Heather's idea. Yeah, and these lessons might need more supporting materials. Absolutely. Like I said, kind of situating the toolkit lesson towards the end of your unit might be a good strategy, and kind of working backwards from the toolkit lesson to think about other readings and videos and conversations you could have around the topic. Krista brought in bringing in sentence frames to add some scaffolding. That's a really, really great idea. Yeah, and then talking about possibly health insurance, you could do some great compare and contrast and critical thinking around how to choose the correct plan for you, or the plan that's going to be best for you as maybe an individual versus a family. And then talking about different factors that affect your rates and things like that. Wow, really great discussions. Christine, yesterday we were able to share save the chat. Do you think that's something we can do today too? And I can add it to the participant folder?
Absolutely. I will make sure to save the chat.
Great. And we'll get it in there so folks can revisit these ideas. Yeah, and Judy says, for science, you could measure the fat and sugar in a Lunchable. Yeah, I think so many of those convenience foods. I don't know if anyone else saw, there was an article going around a month or couple months ago about how eating a hot dog takes so many hours off your life or something like that. And I think that kind of stuff is interesting, how what's in what goes into what we eat and how that affects our health. Yep, talking about the salt and the price per pound for our groceries, all really great ideas. Thank you so much. There's another great lesson in the toolkit about healthy eating on a budget, which is a great one to look at. And in fact, I think we'll look at it after our break. And looking at those nutrition labels. Yep, wonderful ideas. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we're going to quickly going to go through a few ideas. And when I came up with these ideas, I was thinking about what some of you have mentioned, which is how could I add more support? How could I add more context to some of these lessons? And so that first activity, or I'm sorry, the first lesson about communicating with a healthcare provider, I got this idea of effective communication and using sentence frames for clarification. And so you'll have the link to this on the handout of the slides, the PDF version. So using these frames and helping students maybe brainstorm in class and role play some conversations where they could use these frames for asking for clarification. Some of you might be familiar with these conversation cards that exist, collaborative conversation sentence stems. In an in-person class, these can be cut up and handed out to students, and then they can practice using the stems and doing different kinds of dialogues. I think in an online class, maybe they could be used in breakout rooms. So these are another great resource. When we're using the stems or frames, we might try an infogap activity to exchange information about a sample medical or patient information form, role play describing symptoms to a care provider, role play asking questions to a pharmacist about a new medication, role play discussing sick leave policy with an employer. And a lot of people mentioned this idea of the insurance. So we could role play calling an insurance provider or maybe talking with a insurance navigator to try and find out if a particular office visit would be covered, or asking questions around what the best plan might be for me and my family. So some different ideas here for using those materials within a healthcare setting to build health literacy. Another idea from the lessons is this idea of demonstrating some self-advocacy. So how can we help our students to advocate for themselves when they feel like they're maybe not getting the best care? So we could do some brainstorming, brainstorm a problem that one might face related to healthcare. Write a letter or email to address a problem or issue. read some case studies or example problems, reflect on and write about a time when you have worked to solve a problem and what steps did you take and what was the resolution. Some resources related to this, a sample customer complaint letter. This comes from the Federal Trade Commission. So some of you have, I think Rachel mentioned doing some writing with students in class. Another type of writing within this context would be to write a letter of complaint, talking about why maybe your office visit was not, didn't go as you had hoped, and explaining why something might be unsatisfactory. So there are some different materials. There's like kind of an outline of what to include in the letter. And then there are some example letters and templates that are here that you could download and use with your students. Again, this is also great practice for talking about audience and tone and for being able to write with clarity, because we want to get our ideas out without a lot of extra wordiness here. And another idea I thought about, I'm sure you do too. After I go to the dentist or the doctor, or after I take my kids, I'm sure many of you have experienced these emails with patient satisfaction surveys. And I thought that we could maybe use some of these surveys to create classroom materials. Obviously, you couldn't necessarily have your students complete the survey that you got, but maybe you could recreate the survey or a simplified version of it using something like Google, a Google form. And I think, you know, oftentimes maybe if we get an email like this and we're not very comfortable with the language, obviously that's going to decrease our likelihood of responding. And so maybe if we talk with students about why these surveys come out and how they're used, and then practicing answering some of the most common questions, it would help to increase their ability to use their voice and provide feedback on the care that they're receiving. So another idea. And then finally, there's a lot of critical thinking that could go into these lessons. One of them, for especially I think for lower level students, would be categorizing and synthesizing information. We could categorize behaviors or foods by healthy or unhealthy, categorize some statements about health around and decide if they're fact or opinion. Decide if something is an emergency or non-emergency. So lots of ideas for categorizing here. And one tool for doing that might be using a T-chart, which is just this very simple chart with 2 columns. I don't even use the chart. I don't print out a chart. I just have my students divide a piece of paper the long way and draw a line down the middle. And one side could be true and one side could be false. One side could be hospital visit, one side could be clinic, and you just provide, you know, the material for students to sort, and they use it in the chart. So lots of ways to use that. And we've also talked already about doing some comparison, and using a Venn diagram is a great way to add some academic support to that skill, comparing maybe 2 different insurance providers or 2 different lunches, one being a Lunchable and one maybe being something more homemade. And then finally, these are some materials that come from e-reading worksheets that come from their nonfiction reading activities. And I thought of a lot of different ways we could use this. Again, the Venn diagram and comparing medicine A and medicine B, for example. I found these and thought they were interesting. You know, they're ready to go and download. So there's some labels here and then questions that you can use. They also have them for nutrition labels. So some sample nutrition labels. You've already mentioned talking about things like fat or sugar, you know, so the sodium. So you could use these as a starting off point if you don't want to create your own materials. And then there are some questions that go along with those. Okay, so I know we moved through those quickly. You have access to these so you can look again when you have time. Okay. And now we are going to take our break. So we'll take a break for 10 minutes. My clock is saying 10:17. So if you could be back about 10:27 or so, that would be great. And that will leave us time for the second part of our session today. Thank you so much. We'll see you in 10 minutes. We're gonna come back now. And I am just gonna remind anyone who might have maybe turned their cameras on in the breakout rooms earlier today. Please make sure that your camera is turned off during the session. It makes it a lot easier for people if they might be experiencing bandwidth issues, for example, to not have multiple cameras on. So thank you for doing that. And I hope that you enjoyed your break. I hope that you got a quick chance to stretch. And I've appreciated some of the comments people have continued to be putting in the chat. So for example, Patricia said, thanks for this session. It is getting me excited to possibly teach health this summer. That's great, Patricia. That's why we do this, right? Is to inspire each other and learn from each other and to keep the enthusiasm going for these important jobs and roles that we all have. So again, I know people are interested in the materials. Everything will be in that participant folder. The slides are already there, and I'll be adding a copy of the chat at the end of the session so that you can hold on to your colleagues' ideas as well. So we'll continue now, and the second part again is going to be about financial literacy. And so we're going to talk about financial literacy and why that's important. And so when I was thinking about some examples of why financial literacy might be important, I came up with some of these things that we might be familiar with. So Ponzi schemes, right? Ticket scammers, so people who offer to sell you tickets to something that might not be face value, or maybe they tried to get your credit card and then promise the goods later, and then it's a way to get access to your financial information. There's all kinds of scams here, an unsolicited check fraud, where you might be sent something in the mail, you sign that check, and then you are authorizing someone else to have access to your bank information. Automatic withdrawals, phishing schemes, right? Everyone's, I'm sure, received those emails. Or how about those robocalls that you get telling you that your extended warranty has expired, right? So there are so many examples of ways in which we have to be careful to protect our financial information, and that's related to financial literacy. So here we'll read the definition from the toolkit. Financial literacy skills means having the confidence, knowledge, and skills needed to make financial decisions that promote financial self-sufficiency and well-being. These skills include the ability to effectively locate, evaluate, and use information, resources, and services, and to make informed decisions about financial obligations, budgeting, credit, debt, and planning for the future, right? So it's not just about making good decisions right now or protecting our financial information. It's also about having the tools to plan for the future, right? To be able to maybe buy a first home, buy a car. We talked about that, choosing the right insurance company, being able to pay for college. All of these important decisions have a big financial component, right? So like we did with health literacy, we're going to run through the 3 of the example lessons from the TSTM Toolkit. So the first one is problem-based, and this one has to do with changing jobs. And so here the scenario is about someone being offered a job, maybe in another city, and having to decide if taking that job is worth it, considering that there would also be a relocation. And so here is the first page of the lesson. here is the problem. Or I'm sorry, I might have been thinking of a different scenario. In this scenario, it's about Carmen, and she's heard rumors that her job might be cut at the bank where she works. She's a single mom. She's got some younger kids. And so she's thinking about if she were to transition to a new job, okay? And I do think you could bring in some of these ideas. If she were to move, she'd be moving away from her support, which is her family who provides childcare and things like that. So it's thinking about all of the factors that might go into finding a new job or deciding it might be time to go back to school and getting more training. So here I wanted to highlight the idea that a lot of the richness in problem-based learning comes from students working together to brainstorm and evaluate potential solutions. And so here some of the possible solutions are laid out. Students could add more to this list, and then they talk about these solutions and try to maybe assign criteria to help them make the correct, or best, I should say, the best solution for Carmen's problem. And in a few minutes after we look at the lessons, I'm going to show you a great tool for helping your students make decision called a PACED guide, P-A-C-E-D. And some of you might be familiar with that, but it adds a little bit of a structure to this idea of evaluating different possible solutions. Yeah, Beatrice says, my GED students rely only on Facebook news, but never watch the news on a reliable news channel, right? So that idea of information literacy, right? And how do we help our students understand that not everything on Facebook is, or on Twitter is an accurate source of information, right? Mortgages and car loans. Yes, Danielle. And Danielle says bankrate.com has some great calculators. I'm also going to show you guys some videos that are available from the Federal Reserve that talk about things like mortgages and car loans and helping students figure out how to make those important decisions. So great, great topics related to financial literacy. So here we had our problem-based learning lesson with this scenario that students would be talking about. The next one is project-based learning. And this is the one I mentioned before the break, this healthy eating on a budget. As a coach with the TSTM project, it has been my pleasure to see different teachers try out these lessons through some observations. And I have seen both HSC teachers and low-level ELL teachers teach this lesson. And this lesson involves planning a meal, a healthy meal on a budget. One of the adaptations I've seen some ELL teachers make is they will implement this lesson and maybe around a holiday, for example, and have students plan a holiday meal. And then they get to talk about the different foods maybe that are part of their culture for different types of celebrations. I have seen people have their students, the project is a simple presentation about going to the grocery store and how much they spent, all the way up through sharing recipes and putting together videos to share during remote learning. Some teachers have used this as an opportunity to talk about things like online shopping through like Instacart, for example, and how that works. Talking about coupons. You could talk about the different sections in a grocery store. It's a lesson that really lends itself to a lot of different expansion activities, different readings. And Alicia says sharing recipes could also allow for some translanguaging. Yeah, great point. Great point. I know there was a great session on that at the conference. So in a project-based learning lesson, it usually culminates with the students creating some kind of a project or product that can be shared. So for this one, the students plan out a healthy meal and price out the ingredients, like I said. One of the teachers who I worked with during the cohort, he worked with a higher level class and wanted to make this work for his GED students. And so we worked up a way for him to have his students do some research on food deserts and bring that in as some background information before, and then figuring out in their community where they could go to do some shopping, because his students did actually live in a bit of a food desert, and sort of what it means when maybe your choices for buying food are limited. So many interesting ways this lesson could go in, from the very simple and straightforward, let's plan a meal, to something a bit more elaborate and complex. So this is a great project-based lesson that works for many different levels. And then this household cash flow lesson is another one that can work well for different levels. I recently observed this in a beginning level ELL class, where the teacher added quite a lot of supports, like using a Jamboard, and she did a lot with the vocabulary, and she added a beginning level text. And again, I've seen it used up through a GED classroom, where having the students think about, well, when you get your GED and you might be thinking about taking next steps like moving out of the house or starting in college, you're going to need to, a first step there is getting a handle on your finances. So this is a personal financial literacy lesson. Students use this chart here to, and a sample scenario to think about a budget. So here we've got Martin. You'll see Martin has a lot of disposable income to spend on things like food, eating out, and entertainment. This is an awesome lesson to really get students talking and thinking about personal financial choices. You find out here that Martin's outflow, or the money he spends every month, actually outpaces his inflow. So then students get to talk in groups about what should be cut from his budget in order to make it balance. And then there's another scenario here. Yeah, Marvin isn't starving. No, I'm not sure how this one guy spends $400 a month on food, but it's it's a thing. So this is also an integrated and contextualized lesson. This lesson focuses on percents, and with a percent of increase, if Marvin's rent goes up, how does that affect his overall budget? It is a great one to use maybe right now when inflation is so evident around us, because that makes the topic really relevant to our students' lives, right? You've seen the cost of groceries go up. You've seen prices rise at the gas pump. How does that affect your household budget? That you might need to think about where you're going to make cuts. Students can talk about ways to save money. I've heard students talk about things like, well, I turned off my cable and now I just stream things through Netflix, and sharing those kinds of tips leads to really great conversation. Laura says, this is a great link to a form that students can use to determine the lifestyle. Oh, yep. That is great. I also know there's a lifestyle calculator inside the MCIS materials that are available. So this one comes from CA Career Zone. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. Yeah, I love those where students get to choose sort of like, where do you want to live and what kind of car do you want to drive? And here's how much money you need to earn to support that lifestyle. Yes, so that is sort of the expansion activity in this lesson, is students, they move from looking at an example for Martin, then there's a second example for a family, to making their own budget. And one of the times I observed this lesson being taught, the teacher was a digital literacy teacher. Specifically, he worked with Microsoft Office products, and he helped his students learn how to create a spreadsheet that would keep track of their monthly expenses. And that was their final activity here. So lots of ways to bring in different sets of standards that are all going to help our students be more in control of their finances, so that they can be more in control of their goals, right? Because that's really why we need financial literacy. So we feel we have control over reaching our goals. So here is that paced decision-making model. And I learned about this recently. I attended a webinar that I believe was hosted through COABE, where a woman who has spent her career, she's an economics professor and she teaches about entrepreneurship. She gave a great webinar earlier this month, and she talked about 3 tools for teaching about economic reasoning. And one of her tools was this paced decision-making. And I had never heard of this before. What I'd always heard of was another one of her tools, that's a cost-benefit analysis, which, as you might know, kind of functions like that T-chart that I showed earlier, where you have the costs on one side and the benefits on the other side to making a decision. And the way she explained it, a cost-benefit analysis tool works when you only have 2 options, right? Or you're trying to determine the costs and the benefits when you're looking at like a single choice. But oftentimes there are multiple solutions or multiple alternatives when we're thinking about a problem. And so that's where this paced decision-making model comes into play here. And there's some great comments in the chat. I'll pause. Yep, and so Beatrice says, teaching students to save for a rainy day. Yes, when I've actually taught that financial literacy lesson, the one about a household budget, and I taught it in an ELL class. Single one of those students said he needs to be saving more. And so it really gets into that cultural aspect of how we think about money as well. That's a great point. Teaching technology skills. Yep, the idea of using a spreadsheet. Yes, and then we're bringing in our North Star, which we know is important. Yes, the lessons are complete on their own, but can also be adapted. And I think you're really getting to the heart of it, Liddy. So I think they provide great inspiration, but you can do so much with them, which makes them a great versatile tool. So the PACE model, of course, PACE is a acronym here, and the P stands for problem. So the first thing we need to do when we're using this tool is define the problem, okay? Then alternatives, the A is alternatives. We're listing the alternatives. C is criteria. So we're going to see an example of this. Criteria is like, helps us to determine what we really value when we're making a decision. Evaluate the alternatives, and then D is make the decision. So we will look here at, this is an example. So when I started kind of Googling this, I found an example from the CareerWise website, which I thought was great. So they have a sample paced decision-making guide related to determining where you might want to live. So here the problem is you are moving to a new city and you need an apartment. So here are some of the alternatives. You could live in a 1-bedroom apartment on Main Street. You could live in a 1-bedroom apartment on Peaceful Lane, or you could take a 2-bedroom apartment on Distant Place. Their criteria, so you'll see there are 4 criteria here. This is how we're going to decide which of these alternatives is actually best for me. I need to think about the rent, the noise, safety, and public transportation. I do not want to get too deep into this because it would maybe derail us. But when I watched the COABE webinar, when the economist shared this, she called it a paced O grid because she actually weighted these different criteria to help. And then that brings in more math skills, because what it does is it allows students to decide, okay, which of these is actually most important to me? So if I'm straight up looking for the most economical option, then the cost of the rent might be my most weighted criteria. Maybe I don't have a car, and so public transportation is very important to me, and I'm willing to pay more rent for a place that's on a bus line. And so if you bring in the weighting factor It adds another kind of dimension to this. And so I'm sure you could find out more about that. Or if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can reach out to me and I can share some of those materials with you that get into how you add the weighted aspect here. Here, this form, this grid, you can download from the CareerWise website. And it's just a blank form. And I wanted to model a little bit how you might fill it out. So I tried to think of a problem. This is kind of a good problem to have. And it's deciding what to do with the tax return. So maybe I have a little bit of extra money in my pocket and I'm trying to figure out how to spend it. So my problem here is I need to decide the best way to spend a $1,000 tax return. And then I was thinking about, so what are some of the ways, what are some of my options or alternatives? Well, I might save the money. Maybe I also need a new laptop. So maybe I will use this return to buy that new laptop. But also, gosh, it's winter in Minnesota. Wouldn't I like to get out of here? So I'd also like to go on a vacation. Okay. And then I was trying to think of my criteria. So maybe one criteria is what would be the most fiscally responsible choice? What would add convenience to my life? Hey, what about fun? I value fun. Maybe you do too. So that's one of my criteria. And then also, what am I going to need in the future? So if I'm thinking a couple weeks or months out, what's going to benefit me then? And so then students would go through here and, fill this in a little bit. Obviously, saving money might be most fiscally responsible. So I might put something here like I could have this money in a bank account for a rainy day fund. Maybe I know in the future I could use that money down the road. If I wanted to put off going on a vacation now, I would have it for later, So I think going through and filling out this form is a great exercise because it allows students an opportunity to really think through these decisions, and they can then really articulate why and how they arrived at the decision that they arrived at. Obviously, you could use this in class and students could talk about their alternatives and criteria, and you could add a lot of rich conversation here as well. And so I love the idea of using this PACE decision-making grid to get students thinking about how to make reasoned decisions that are based on, explicit criteria. And so if you have any ideas about how you might use this in class, I know a couple of people are saying it's very useful. You could go ahead and share those out. I think we'll have time to read out some more comments. So I'd love to see what you're thinking about there. And then some other resources that I came across. Some of you, if you read the newsletter, you might have seen the article that was in this week's edition, where I talked a little bit about some of these financial literacy resources. And again, going back to that COABE webinar, the presenter shared a list of resources, and this was one of her resources, the Federal Reserve Education website. And that's sort of a big resource that kind of links out to other resources or other sort of companion resources or companion websites, so to speak. And one of those companion sites is this Page One Economics resource. And so Page One Economics is sort of like a small newsletter or a lesson, but it's kind of formatted to look like a newsletter. And they all look the same way. All of the ones that I looked at look the same way. So they've got a glossary off to the left side, and then they have a text. And they are long. The ones I looked at, even the middle school version, they were several pages of text. So this might be an opportunity as a teacher to do sort of like a jigsaw where maybe students only read a portion of it, or maybe you have students reading a section at a time and maybe doing some summarizing, because it's quite a lot of text. But one of the things I really, really love about these lessons is all of the wonderful graphic literacy that they provide. So there are always graphs and charts and different types of graphs and charts that I saw when I was looking at some of the lessons. And then there are also these wonderful examples of informational texts that are within a really useful context. So this was from December of 2021. This one is about inflation. Again, I think such a very relevant topic right now. These lessons are available at 2 levels. So there's a middle school level, and then there is a high school / college level. They are dense, but I think you could easily pull out a piece of them and make them more accessible for students. So here, this is what it sort of looks like. They have an entire website, a companion website that's just for page 1 economics, and it comes from the St. Louis Fed. I pulled some snaps of some of the ones I thought were really interesting. So automation and the minimum wage, how if we were to raise the minimum wage, how that might actually decrease job opportunities because more employers might automate. Neighborhood redlining, racial segregation, and home ownership. So I know this is a topic that I have heard a lot about here in the Metro. I live in Robbinsdale. My house used to be under a racial covenant, and there are resources available to get those removed. The one on my house has been removed, but there are a shocking number of communities right here in Minnesota where there are racial covenants in place. And this is an interesting thing to read about with students, and obviously could lead to many, many different discussions, including why some people of color, it's harder for them to build generational wealth, right? Excuse me. And then the last one here, and these are just examples again, do you want an extended warranty with that? So these are some examples. There are archives for these lessons going back to 2007. And to me, when I was looking through, it looked like they came out every month. So if you multiply, 10 or 12 a year over all of those years, you will see that there are quite a few of these for you to look through and search to see if there is one that would match up with a topic that you want to talk about. When you download these, you get the text and then informational question set. And so they are great lessons. I know some of them have won awards. It says on the website, some of the lessons have won awards from the National Council of Economic Instructors or Economic Teachers. So these are high quality lessons from a very reliable source. And we've got some comments here. There's potential for taking paced decision-making and using it to make well thought out inferences when reading text. It forces the reader to look at a problem in multiple ways. That's really interesting, and a great way to sort of expand how you could use that tool. Yesterday during the conference, I attended the Take and Bake with Debbie Fawcett from GED Testing Services, and one of her 5 tips for developing reasoning skills with our students was practicing inferences. So that's a great idea. And Krista says the Fed has been supportive of adult ed for a long time. Oh, cool. Our local branch used to be especially involved in supporting family literacy. Yeah, they have some really amazing tools. And thanks for highlighting that, Krista. And there are groups, there are legal advocacy groups, for example, who can help you get a covenant removed. And I know they exist in the Metro and probably all over the place. So these page 1 economic lessons or newsletters are one collection of some really great texts. I know when we were looking at the lessons earlier and when you were in your share or your breakout rooms, some people mentioned how you might want to add text to these lessons to kind of build in some background knowledge or to extend the learning. And I'm sure you could find texts here that would align with many of those topics as well. I know that there are some great texts for lower level students in the Reading Skills for Today's Adult collection. lesson. For example, I know that there was one called the envelope system that had to do with thinking about a household budget, as well as many others related to taxes. I know there's one about getting a rebate. So all sorts of things that you could add into one of the toolkit lessons to add more support or add more context. All right, and maybe you don't just want to read about these economic or personal finance texts with your students. You could also do some listening. There's a great video series available also on one of the St. Louis Fed companion websites. This one's called the Econ Lowdown. And I did not explore this like super in depth, but that seems to be a whole portal that you could use as a teaching sort of tool with your students, where you could kind of assign lessons through there. They have some question guides. They have many things that you could use to support some of these materials. I just didn't explore all of them. The videos can be found and used without doing any logging in or creating any kind of an account. So they have a series of videos called Personal Finance 101 Conversations. The videos are generally short, like 6 or 7 minutes, and they're on these topics that students are going to find really engaging. So a couple of examples, they have Mortgage 101, Car Insurance 101, Forms 101. So for someone who maybe is entering the workforce for the first time, they have some videos about how you fill out those forms, like the I-9 and the W-4. And I thought those were a great resource as well. And so these, again, short videos. One of the things I noticed when I watched one, and we're going to probably watch one in just a minute if I can get this to work, is they use sort of avatars in them. So they're kind of animated, but they're not like cartoony, but they're kind of avatars instead of real live action people, right? And the avatars are very diverse. And so there was a woman in a wheelchair, there was a woman in a hijab. They have like a policewoman who's African-American. And I really liked that they thought about the diversity piece when they created these. To me, that reinforces the idea that these were thoughtful and well put together. So another one of the videos is called College Choice One-on-One. And in this video, it talks about going to college at different types of colleges or universities, like a private school versus a state school. And another thing about the videos, and I'm not sure, I didn't check to see if they exist for every single video, but at least for this one, it also has a transcript, which I know can be really useful if you have non-native English speakers in your class, because they might like to see, I know my students often like to see the words when they're listening to help them. And they are also closed captioned and so accessible in different ways. So I am going to attempt to show one of these, and it might take a minute here. I'm gonna click here. And we're gonna see if this will work. And oh, you know what? I'm not sure if it'll work because of the sound. You guys will have to let me know. Are you seeing where it says College Choice 101 now, Christine?
Yes, and I was wondering about that as well. So when you go to share your screen, you should see something that you can click that says share sound.
Okay, let's see. So if I click on share my screen, one participant can share. I might have to stop for a minute and start again. Sorry, this might take just 1 second. Let's see here. So I'm going to share my screen, but it doesn't look like it doesn't look like I'm able to share my screen at this exact moment.
Well.
Oh, now I can. There we go. And I'm going to share sound and I'm going to optimize. And I am
Perfect.
going to go here and I'm going to hope that this works. This might not work because I'm using my work computer. Okay. Sorry. Christine, is there any way you could share the video? The link is on the form. If not, people can just watch the video later and that's okay. My computer won't let me share my sound.
Can you see the video here?
I think I will in a minute. There it is.
There it is. Okay, let me try.
Thanks. This is why teamwork makes the dream work.
Let me turn my, sorry, everybody. I want to make sure because I did a video yesterday and it was not very loud. So I want to make sure that my sound is turned up enough. Okay. So let's try this.
So I think you have to click on the link. It's not not sure it's embedded.
No, okay. Here it is.
Here we go.
Okay, so let's try this. Thanks everyone for your
Thank you.
patience. You hear it?
Yeah, I can hear.
Continuing your education after high school is a major decision. There are many options to choose from, including apprenticeship programs, military service, community and technical colleges, or four-year public and private universities, among others. It's true there are many things to consider, such as, what are the academic programs like? How did you like the campus when you visited? Is it far enough from or close enough to home? How much does it cost? What kinds of scholarships are available? And what kind of job can you get when you're done? Additional education is a big investment of your time and money, so it's important to select a program of study that allows you to utilize your strengths, find opportunities to do work you find satisfying, grow professionally and personally, and of course, obtain employment. In this episode, we'll focus on some aspects of choosing a four-year college or university. One of the first things to consider when choosing a college is what you'd like to study. Knowing your skills, interests, and aspirations will help you choose a major and program that's a good fit for you. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Handbook is an excellent source of information on jobs, including education requirements, work environment, median income, projected growth rates of occupations, and other data. It's a good idea to think about your interests and to take some skills assessments and interest inventories if you can. After that, you'll want to compare the costs of a four-year degree at all of the schools you're considering, and then compare these costs with the projected future income for majors you're interested in pursuing. This can help you predict what portion of your future income you will need to allocate to student loan payments after you graduate. We'll compare salaries later, but first let's look at tuition at two four-year universities, one private and one state. The College Board publishes information about the costs of college and the changes over time. We'll use the College Board data for our example. The private university's tuition with room and board is about $49,870 per year, which is $199,480 for all 4 years. On the other hand, the state university is about $21,950 a year for tuition with room and board, or $87,800 for 4 years. Still a lot of money. The totals don't mean you'll pay the full amount out of pocket at either college, though. Few students pay full price, and few students pay nothing at all. This is because most qualify for or earn some financial aid in the form of scholarships, grants, or work study. Private schools often have more money to offer students in the form of grants and scholarships than public universities do. Often, this can make the actual cost to attend similar for most students. To help potential students, most colleges have a tool called a net price calculator on their website that will help you estimate what it will cost to attend that school based on your information. In addition, the U.S. Department of Education has a terrific website called the College Scorecard. There you'll be able to figure out how much the average student pays at a given school, the school's graduation rate, and the average rate at which students are able to repay their student loans. The tuition price is only part of the story though, so let's talk about the other side of this equation, your projected future income. Evaluating projected income will give you an idea of how long it'll take to repay a loan and how much interest you'll wind up paying over the loan term. When you do your own research, you can use the BLS Occupational Outlook Handbook or other sources to find specific salary information for jobs. For this example, we'll assume your chosen occupations are computer science, social work, and art and design. We'll say you would earn an average income of $80,000, $45,000, and $50,000 respectively. When people borrow to fund their education, they typically have to begin making loan payments when they graduate or stop attending school. According to Experian, one of the major consumer credit reporting companies, the average American carries $35,000 in student loan debt. We'll create a chart using $35,000 as the principal or initial amount of the loan. We'll show the payoff period and interest paid if you devote 10% of your estimated monthly income to paying off your loan. We're going to assume a typical 5% student loan interest rate and use an online calculator to figure out the total interest paid and the time it'll take to pay back the loan. You may wonder how this information is helpful. For one thing, it can help you evaluate the options when you get your financial aid package from colleges and give you a better sense of what college might actually cost. Now that you know how to do some cost of college math, you might want to use some of the great calculators available online. A pretty campus and awesome intramurals are nice, but when it comes to the bottom line, you'll be wise to prepare with research so you know what college is going to cost and what you're likely to see as a return on that investment. Be sure to check out our video on different types of college loans and grants.
All right. You want to share your screen again, Stephanie? Very cool video, by the way. That was really awesome. Stephanie, we can't hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. I just talked for a good 2 minutes to myself. Okay, sorry about that. I turned off my sound during the video, everyone. I apologize. I was just saying, Mary Jo shared a great tip about how you can with some, I'm not sure about every platform or if it has to do with on your computer, you can adjust the playback so that the sound, the speakers coming out a little bit more slowly, which might help for non-native English speakers. And then I was saying how another easy support, fairly easy support, is to create maybe some guided notes, which is basically just sort of an outline of the video to help your students follow along and keep on track, and maybe put down some information that that you might want them to take away. And Heather says playback speed can be adjusted on all YouTube videos. That's what I thought it might have to do with the platform. So these videos might be available on YouTube. That's not where we link them from now. They were coming from this Federal Reserve website, but maybe there are ways to adjust it here as well. And Laura says she likes using guided notes. Yeah, I like using guided notes as a teacher because it forces me to watch the video in advance to make sure that I'm not going to have any surprises. And then it helps me to think about what I really want my students to take away from it. So it's just an extra layer of planning, but once you've got them done, of course, they can be reused and reused. And I also like them because they can be shared through an online learning platform or a learning management system. That's what I was trying to think of. And then your students could watch the video and have the notes and kind of do the work a little more independently, which I like as well. And so, yeah, and Christine says they can be supported as little or as much as you need. So a great tool there, guided notes. All right, so that is it. If anyone has some final thoughts, please share those in the chat. Otherwise, I hope you have found this useful, and I hope you're coming away with some ideas for how you might be able to integrate a little more financial literacy and health literacy in your own classes. Thank you for the positive feedback. I appreciate that. Oh, Alicia, oh my goodness, thank you. That lives large in my heart, your comment. And so, yes, Patsy's reminding us, and I also put it on the slide here. The next session will be coffee breaks starting at 11:30, and you will access those, of course, through your flyer for the conference, and that link is in the chat. So thank you all for being here. Please do access the slides in the PDF version of the slides so that you have all the links, and we'll get the chat in there in just a couple minutes. So thank you, Christine, for your amazing tech support. Obviously would have been real tricky especially with the video today, and you managed our breakout rooms, and Sarah as well. Thank you both for being here to help with that. Thanks.
I did stop. Oh.
Thank you.